The air at forward operating base Viper tasted of grit and scorched metal. It was a permanent flavor, baked into the landscape by a relentless sun and the lingering ghosts of munitions. Dust, the consistency of powdered sugar, coated everything: the HESCO barriers, the razor wire, the shoulders of every soldier moving with the lethargic, heat-drained purpose that defined life in the sector. It was a place of temporary permanence, a collection of sand-colored containers and tents huddled together in a vast, indifferent ocean of rock and gravel. Into this world of baked earth and weary vigilance walked a woman who seemed entirely out of place. She moved with a quiet economy of motion, her boots making almost no sound on the packed dirt path leading from the flight line. Her uniform, a standard OCP, was clean, the creases still sharp from a recent press. It was the uniform of someone who spent their time behind a desk, not in the dirt. She carried a single, heavy-looking Pelican case in one hand and a nondescript pack on her back. Her face was calm, her dark eyes scanning the layout of the base not with the anxiety of a newcomer, but with the cool assessment of an architect reviewing a blueprint. She was neither young nor old, her features composed in a way that defied easy categorization, suggesting a history that had worn away any trace of frivolity. Her destination was the administrative hub, a long, refrigerated container buzzing with the hum of servers and air conditioning. Inside, a harried-looking army captain glanced up from a mountain of paperwork, his eyes tired. "Can I help you?" She placed the case on the floor and produced a set of orders from a pocket on her sleeve. "Chief Warrant Officer Sharma, reporting as ordered. I'm here for the C4I network overhaul." The captain, a man named Pierce, took the papers and scanned them. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "A CW04? They sent a chief? For a network upgrade." He sounded less impressed and more confused. Warrant officers, especially senior ones, were strange, mythical creatures in the eyes of many conventional officers. Deeply specialized, technically brilliant, and operating on a plane of existence outside the normal chain of command. They were usually found in high-level strategic commands, not tinkering with servers at a dusty FOB. "The system here is antiquated," Sharma said, her voice even and low. "It requires a specialist." "Right?" Pierce said, still looking at the orders as if they might contain a hidden punchline. "Well, welcome to Viper, Chief. Your container is over in the Warrant Warren, we call it. Section C. Let me get you a runner to show you the way." "Unnecessary, Captain. I can read a map," she replied, picking up her case. "I'll need full admin access to the JOC server stack and level 1 diagnostic privileges by 1800. Pierce blinked. "That's above my pay grade. You'll need to talk to Major Kensington." "His name is on my orders," Sharma said, her gaze unwavering. "He's expecting my request." She gave a slight nod, a gesture that was both polite and utterly final, and walked out before the captain could formulate another question. He watched her go, a flicker of unease mixing with his confusion. There was a stillness about her, an unnerving self-possession that didn't belong in the chaotic, loud world of a forward base. Later, after stowing her gear in a small, Spartan container that was identical to all the others, Sharma made her way to the dining facility. The DFAC was the social heart of any FOB, a place of loud camaraderie and clattering trays. It was a microcosm of the military caste system. The senior officers sat at one end, the junior enlisted at another, and the various specialized units carved out their own territories. In the center of it all, holding court at a long table, was a team of Navy SEALs. They were easy to spot. Their gear was a mix of standard issue and expensive private purchase items. Their beards were fuller than regulations allowed, and they carried themselves with the confident, predatory grace of men who knew they were at the very top of the food chain. They were laughing, their voices cutting easily through the din of the hall. Their leader, a petty officer first class with sun-bleached hair and a cocky grin, was telling a story, his hands moving to emphasize each point. His call sign was Riptide, and his reputation for both battlefield lethality and casual arrogance was well known across the base. Sharma paid them no mind. She moved through the line, collecting a plate of dry chicken, overcooked rice, and some wilted salad. She found an empty table in a quiet corner, away from the main flow of traffic, and sat down. She ate with the same methodical focus she did everything else, her attention on her food, seemingly oblivious to the world around her. But she wasn't oblivious. She was observing. She noted the power dynamics, the informal hierarchies, the subtle tensions between units. She saw the way the regular infantry soldiers gave the SEALs a wide berth, a mixture of awe and resentment in their eyes. She saw the way the Air Force drone pilots kept to themselves, their faces pale from hours spent in darkened rooms staring at screens. She saw everything. It was her job to see things others missed, whether in lines of code or in the complex human network of a combat zone. Her quiet solitude, however, made her a curiosity. In a place where everyone was part of a team, a tribe, a lone individual stood out, especially one who looked as out of place as she did. Riptide noticed her. He paused his story, his eyes narrowing slightly. He nudged the man next to him, a hulking breacher named Tank. "Hey, check it out," Riptide murmured, tilting his head toward Sharma's table. "Newbie. Looks like she got lost on her way to the library." The other SEALs chuckled. They saw what he saw. A clean uniform, a placid demeanor, a woman alone. In their world, this translated to inexperience, weakness, a support clerk who didn't understand the real business of war. She was an outsider, an easy target for their brand of boisterous, condescending humor. Riptide stood up, his tray in hand, and sauntered over to her table. His team watched, anticipating the show. He was known for this, for welcoming new arrivals in a way that firmly established the pecking order. He stopped in front of her table, casting a long shadow over her plate. She didn't look up immediately, taking one more deliberate bite of chicken before slowly raising her eyes to meet his. Her expression was neutral, giving him nothing. "Evening," Riptide said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Don't see you around here before." "You knew." "I arrived today," she said simply. Right. Welcome to the suck," he grinned. "What's your story? Admin? Intel? You look like you know your way around a spreadsheet." His tone was light, but the insult was clear. He was classifying her, putting her in a box labeled non-essential. "Something like that," she replied, her voice calm. She made no move to elaborate, her gaze steady. Her lack of reaction seemed to annoy him. He was used to people being intimidated or flustered by his presence. "Well, it's good to know who's who around here," he continued, leaning against the table. "You know, in case we need some paperwork pushed or a printer unjammed in a real hurry." The other SEAL snickered. "So you gotta have a rank, right? What are you, a specialist? PFC?" He looked her up and down, a theatrical gesture of evaluation. "Let me guess. Air Force, probably. A senior airman, fresh off the C-130-inch. He was baiting her, trying to get a rise out of her, to see her squirm. It was a power play, designed to amuse his friends and put the newcomer in her place. The surrounding tables had gone quiet, soldiers pretending to eat while they listened in. The confrontation was a piece of theater for the bored and the stressed. Sharma placed her fork down gently on her plate. She looked at his chest, at the gold trident pinned above his service ribbons. Then she looked back into his eyes. Her own were dark and unreadable, like deep water. "You're a petty officer first class," she stated. It wasn't a question. Riptide's grin widened. "That's right. E6. Been around the block a few times." He puffed out his chest slightly. "So, come on. Don't be shy. The boys are all wondering. What's your rank?" He asked it loudly, playing to his audience. He expected a mumble, a quiet admission of a low rank that would confirm his assessment and end the game. He wanted to hear private, or specialist, or airman. He wanted the satisfaction of being right. Sharma held his gaze for a long moment. The silence in the DFAC deepened. The clatter of trays stopped. Everyone was watching. Then, in a clear, level voice that carried easily through the quiet hall, she answered him. "Chief Warrant Officer 4. The words dropped into the silence like stones into a still pond. There was a beat of absolute stillness. Riptide's smirk froze on his face, then slowly melted away, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The laughter from his table died instantly. A CWO4, AW4. In the rigid hierarchy of the military, that was the pay grade equivalent of a major. She wasn't a junior enlisted soldier. She wasn't a low-level admin clerk. She was a senior, highly respected technical expert who outranked him by a significant margin. He hadn't just been condescending to a newcomer. He had been openly mocking a senior officer in front of half the base. The color drained from Riptide's face. He straightened up, the casual arrogance vanishing from his posture. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The entire cafeteria was frozen, a tableau of shock and dawning realization. The quiet woman in the corner wasn't a clerk. She was a ghost, a myth, a senior warrant, and in one brief, devastatingly simple sentence, she had just dismantled the social structure of the room. The silence was broken by a sudden, jarring sound, the piercing shriek of the base-wide alarm system. Red lights began to flash, bathing the stunned faces in a hellish, pulsing glow. A voice, distorted and urgent, boomed from the overhead speakers. Incoming! 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 All personnel seek immediate cover. Before anyone could fully process the shift, the first mortar round landed. The ground shook, a deep, percussive thump that vibrated through the concrete floor of the DFAC. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into chaos lit only by the strobing red emergency lights. The game was over. A new one had just begun. The second round hit closer, the explosion a deafening crack that shattered the thick windows of the DFAC, sending a spray of plexiglass shards across the room. Screams mingled with the shouts of NCOs barking orders. The carefully constructed order of the base dissolved into instinctual panic. Soldiers scrambled for cover, overturning tables and chairs in their haste. Riptide and his team reacted instantly, their training overriding their shock. "Get down! Everyone get down!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. They were already moving, pushing people towards the interior walls, their bodies instinctively shielding others. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by the grim focus of combat professionals. But amidst the chaos, one person remained preternaturally calm. Chief Warrant Officer Anya Sharma had not flinched. As the first explosion rocked the building, she had already pushed her chair back and was on her feet. She wasn't moving toward cover. She was moving toward the exit, her steps deliberate and swift, her dark eyes scanning the ceiling as if tracing the building's structural integrity. The dust and smoke swirling in the red light didn't seem to faze her. While everyone else was reacting to the immediate threat, she was already processing the nature of the attack. Another round landed, this one striking a generator complex just outside, followed by a secondary explosion and the smell of burning diesel fuel. The impacts were not random. They were targeted, precise. This wasn't just harassment fire. This was a coordinated, intelligent assault. As Sharma reached the exit, she passed Riptide, who was pulling a young, terrified-looking soldier under a sturdy table. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. His were wide with adrenaline and the shock of the attack. Hers were narrow, focused, and utterly devoid of fear. There was no "I told you so" in her gaze, no hint of triumph from their earlier encounter. There was only an unnerving intensity, the look of a mind working at a speed he couldn't comprehend. She gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod, and then she was gone, disappearing into the maelstrom outside. The base was a scene of controlled pandemonium. Figures sprinted through the swirling dust, their forms silhouetted by the eerie red emergency strobes and the orange glow of fires. The constant, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of outgoing heavy machine gun fire from the perimeter guard towers joined the chorus of chaos. But over it all was a new, more insidious sound, a high-pitched, warbling static that seemed to fill the air itself. It was the sound of electronic warfare. Sharma's destination was the Joint Operations Center, the nerve center of the FOB. The building, a heavily reinforced concrete bunker, was already a hive of frantic activity. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The main holographic map in the center of the room was flickering, displaying corrupted data and ghost images. Screens that should have been showing live drone feeds were filled with static or frozen on a single, useless frame. The communications channels were a cacophony of white noise and distorted, clipped voices. "I've lost contact with Predator 1," an Air Force controller shouted. "The link is completely severed. Comms are down across the board," a signals NCO yelled, ripping his headset off in frustration. "It's not just jamming. They're spoofing our network. I'm getting phantom signals, false troop movements. The system is compromised." Colonel Evans, the base commander, stood in the middle of the room, his face a grim mask. He was a seasoned infantry officer, a man comfortable with the brutal calculus of ground combat. But this was different. His eyes and ears had been taken from him. He was blind, deaf, and under attack. "Where is the mortar fire coming from?" Evans demanded, his voice a low growl. "Someone get me a location." "We can't, sir," an intel analyst replied, his hands flying over a keyboard to no effect. "The counter-battery radar is being overwhelmed with false positives. It's painting targets everywhere and nowhere at once. The EW is too sophisticated." Another mortar round landed just outside the JOC, shaking the entire bunker. Dust sifted down from the ceiling vents. The lights flickered violently. The enemy was walking their rounds in, getting closer with each shot. They were being guided by a spotter who was clearly inside the base's electronic defenses, operating with impunity. It was into this vortex of failing technology and rising panic that Sharma walked. She didn't announce her presence. She simply moved through the chaos to an auxiliary analysis terminal in the corner, a station that had been designated as non-essential and was currently unmanned. She set her Pelican case on the floor, opened it with a series of precise clicks, and pulled out a custom-built keyboard and a small, black box covered in strange-looking ports. She unplugged the station's standard keyboard and plugged in her own. Her fingers began to move, a blur of motion across the keys. Lines of code scrolled across the screen at a dizzying speed, far faster than any normal diagnostic program. She wasn't trying to fix the system. She was dissecting it. Major Kensington, the communications officer, noticed her first. "Chief, what are you doing? That terminal is offline. The whole network is compromised." Sharma didn't look up. "The network isn't compromised," she said, her voice a low counterpoint to the surrounding shouts. "It's being manipulated. There's a difference." She bypassed the main graphical user interface, diving deep into the system's command line interface. She was working in the digital bedrock of the base's C4I system, a place few people even knew existed. The flickering holographic map, the static-filled screens, that was all just the skin. She was going for the skeleton. The static in the room seemed to have a rhythm, a pattern that only she could perceive. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening not with her ears, but with a deeper sense of the electronic spectrum. The enemy's EW wasn't just a wall of noise. It was an intricate piece of music. It had a key, a tempo, a structure, and every structure had a weak point. "They're using a polymorphic frequency-hopping algorithm," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Smart, very smart, but noisy." Her fingers flew again. She wasn't fighting the jamming signal. She was using it. The enemy's powerful broadcast was a floodlight, and she was analyzing the shadows it cast. Every piece of hardware on the base, from the radar systems to the soldiers' individual radios, was interacting with that signal, creating tiny, microscopic echoes and distortions in the electronic noise. It was a sea of meaningless data to everyone else. To her, it was a map. She isolated the signal from the counter-battery radar. As the analyst had said, it was being flooded with false returns. But Sharma ignored the returns themselves. Instead, she focused on the fractional delays in the signal's response time, the picosecond variations caused by the jamming wave interacting with the radar's own broadcast. She built a new filter not based on what the radar was seeing, but on how the jamming was affecting its ability to see. A new window opened on her screen. It was a raw data plot, a chaotic swirl of numbers and symbols. But within the chaos, a pattern began to emerge. Tiny, rhythmic pulse. A heartbeat in the storm. "Got you," she whispered. The pulse was the enemy spotter's microtransmitter. It was a low-power, burst transmission device, designed to be invisible in a normal electronic environment. But within the overwhelming noise of their own jamming, its tiny, disciplined signal stood out to her like a flare in the night. It was hiding in plain sight. She began to triangulate, pulling in residual data from 3 separate, compromised communications nodes. The first node gave her a bearing. The second narrowed it down. The third locked it in. A set of coordinates appeared on her screen. The spotter was on the ridgeline to the northeast, less than 2 kilometers away, nestled in a small rock outcropping. At that moment, the doors to the JOC burst open and Riptide and his team stormed in. They were covered in dust, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. "Colonel," Riptide yelled, his voice raw. "We're blind out there. We can't get a fix on the mortars. We need intel or we're all sitting ducks." His eyes swept the room, landing on Sharma, still hunched over the terminal in the corner. A look of pure contempt crossed his face. What is she doing? Is the IT department seriously trying to run a virus scan right now? Colonel Evans, his face pale and strained, ignored him. He was watching Sharma, a dawning sense of hope warring with his ingrained skepticism. "Chief, report. Have you got anything?" Sharma didn't turn around. Her focus was absolute. She had the spotter. Now she needed the tubes. The spotter signal was the key. She analyzed its transmission protocol. It was sending tiny packets of data, correction data for the mortar team. And those packets had a destination address. It was heavily encrypted, but the signal path itself wasn't. It was a direct line-of-sight transmission. She typed another series of commands, her custom hardware box beginning to emit a low hum. She was forcing the network's damaged sensors to listen in a way they weren't designed to look for the faintest whisper of a signal that matched the protocol she had just identified. A second set of coordinates bloomed on her screen, a kilometer behind the first. It was the mortar pit, tucked into a wadi, perfectly shielded from direct observation. "I have them," Sharma said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. 2 targets. Spotter and tubes. Riptide scoffed. "You have them? How? Every piece of high-tech gear on this base is a paperweight right now. What did you do? Google their location." Colonel Evans shot him a look that could have melted steel. He walked over to stand behind Sharma, looking down at her screen. It was filled with incomprehensible lines of code and 2 sets of 10-digit grid coordinates. It looked like nonsense, but the sheer, unshakable confidence in her voice held him. "Who the hell are you, Chief?" Evans asked, his voice low and urgent. For the first time, Sharma paused. She looked up, not at the colonel, but at a grizzled master sergeant from the Signals Intelligence Platoon who had been watching her with a strange expression of dawning recognition. She turned back to her screen. "My name is Chief Warrant Officer 4 Anya Sharma," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Her fingers moved again, routing the coordinates to the one system the EW couldn't touch, the hardened, shielded landline that connected directly to the M777 howitzer battery on the far side of the base. "My call sign is Oracle." The name landed in the JOC with the force of a physical blow. Riptide and his team just looked confused. But the SIGINT Master Sergeant's eyes went wide, and 2 other older NCOs exchanged a look of pure astonishment. Even Colonel Evans took a half-step back. The call sign Oracle wasn't just a name. It was a legend in the intelligence community. A ghost story whispered by operators and analysts. Oracle was a phantom, a name attached to some of the most sensitive and successful signals intelligence operations of the last decade, missions that officially never took place in countries they were never supposed to be in. Oracle was the operator who could pull signals out of thin air, who could hear whispers in a hurricane of static, who could map an enemy's entire network armed with nothing but a keyboard and an antenna. No one knew who Oracle was. It was a faceless, rankless entity. Until now. The quiet woman they had mistaken for a clerk was a living legend from the darkest corners of the intelligence world. "Fire mission," Sharma said into the landline headset she had just put on, her voice betraying no hint of the bombshell she had just dropped. "Priority target. 2 locations." She read out the first set of coordinates. "Target 1, enemy observation post. Danger close. Fire for effect." A moment later, the deep, guttural roar of the big guns echoed across the base, a sound that was felt as much as it was heard. Even inside the bunker, they could feel the vibration in the soles of their boots. On the main screen, which was still mostly static, a single camera feed from a perimeter tower flickered to life for a split second. It showed a brilliant, silent flash on the northeast ridgeline. "Target 1 serviced," Sharma said calmly. "Shift to Target 2. She read the second set of coordinates. "Target 2. Enemy mortar position. Full battery, 3 volleys. Fire for effect." The howitzers roared again, a sustained, rolling thunder that spoke of overwhelming firepower. The effect was instantaneous. The high-pitched, warbling sound of the electronic warfare attack abruptly ceased. The static on the comms channels vanished, replaced by the familiar, welcome crackle of open frequencies. The screens in the JOC flickered, cleared, and came back to life, displaying drone feeds and tactical data. The holographic map stabilized, showing friendly positions in crisp, clear blue. And most importantly, the incoming mortar fire stopped. An almost surreal silence descended upon the JOC. The chaos and panic of a moment before evaporated, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving calm. They had gone from being blind, deaf, and moments from being overrun to a state of complete situational awareness and control in the space of less than 2 minutes. All because of one woman in the corner, who was now calmly typing a final line of code, shutting down the diagnostic tools she had used to hijack the base's own sensory network. Colonel Evans stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had been preparing to lead a desperate, blind defense. He had been envisioning casualty reports, a perimeter breach, the loss of his base. And now the threat was simply gone, erased. Riptide and his SEALs stood frozen in the middle of the room. Their bravado, their condescension, their entire worldview had been shattered. They had burst in ready to be the saviors, the kinetic solution to a complex problem, only to find the battle had been won by a woman they had dismissed as a glorified secretary, using weapons they didn't even understand. Riptide looked from the now clear tactical displays back to Sharma. His face was a mixture of humiliation, confusion, and a dawning, grudging awe. The IT girl hadn't just sent a stern email. She had called down thunder and lightning from a clear sky. Sharma unplugged her keyboard, coiled the cable with practiced efficiency, and placed it back in its custom-fitted slot in the Pelican case. She closed the lid, the latches clicking shut with a sound of finality. She stood up and turned to face the room. Every eye was on her. The JOC, filled with 24 battle-hardened soldiers and officers, was utterly silent. In that moment, her simple, clean uniform seemed more imposing than any armor. Her quiet demeanor now spoke not of meekness, but of a deep, unshakable confidence that needed no outward display. She looked at Colonel Evans and gave a small, formal nod. "The primary threat is neutralized, sir. Their command and control element is down. You'll still have probes on the perimeter, but the coordinated assault is broken." Her report was concise, clinical. "I recommend you deploy a QRF to the second grid to confirm and collect evidence." They were using some very interesting hardware. Evans finally found his voice. "Chief, thank you." The words sounded inadequate. He cleared his throat. "Master Sergeant," he barked at the SIGINT NCO. "Get a team ready to move with the QRF. I want everything from that mortar pit." Oracle's orders. Using her call sign was a deliberate act of acknowledgement. It was a signal to everyone in the room that what they had just witnessed was something far outside the bounds of normal operations. Sharma simply nodded again. With her Pelican case in hand, she walked toward the exit. As she passed the SEAL team, Riptide instinctively took a step back, clearing a path for her as if she were a visiting general. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, his face burning with a shame that was deeper than any physical wound. She walked out of the JOC and back into the dusty, smoke-hazed air of the base, leaving behind a room full of soldiers who were just beginning to grapple with the reality of what they had seen. The myth of Oracle was real, and she was here at FOB Viper to fix their network. The following evening, the DFAC was a different place. The usual boisterous noise was muted, replaced by a low, respectful murmur. Conversations were held in quieter tones. The attack had sobered everyone, but it was more than that. A fundamental shift had occurred in the base's social fabric. Sharma sat at the same corner table alone. She ate her meal with the same unhurried, methodical grace as before. But this time, no one saw a lonely clerk. They saw a quiet titan. Soldiers from different units would walk past her table, and though they said nothing, they would give her a slight nod of the head, a gesture of profound respect. She would acknowledge it with a small, almost imperceptible dip of her own chin before returning to her meal. She was halfway through her rice when a shadow fell over her table again. She looked up. It was Riptide. He stood alone, his team watching from their table across the room. The cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a somber, uncertain expression. He wasn't wearing his usual confident swagger like a second skin. He looked younger, humbled. He held his hands out, palms up, a gesture of peace. He said nothing for a long moment, simply meeting her gaze. His blue eyes, which had been so full of mockery the day before, now held a complex mixture of apology and awe. "Chief," he said, his voice quiet and raspy. It was the first time he had addressed her by her proper title. Sharma waited, her expression neutral. He reached to the sleeve of his uniform and unfastened a small, Velcro-backed patch. It was his team's insignia, a skull intertwined with a mythical sea serpent set against a black field. It was not a standard-issue item. It was a symbol of their brotherhood, an icon carried only by team members. These patches were traded among elite units as the highest form of professional respect, a currency more valuable than any official medal. He leaned forward and gently placed the patch on the table next to her plate. He did not slide it. He placed it. The gesture was deliberate, almost reverent. He straightened up, took one step back, and gave her a slow, formal nod. It was not the casual nod of a peer, but the respectful acknowledgement a warrior gives to another, superior warrior. He held her gaze for a second longer, his eyes conveying the apology he couldn't put into words. Then he turned and walked back to his table without another word. As he sat down, his team members, one by one, turned to look at Sharma. Each man, from the hulking breacher to the lean sniper, met her eyes and gave the same slow, deliberate nod of respect. Sharma looked down at the patch on the table. The intricate stitching of the skull and serpent seemed to stare up at her. She picked it up, feeling the rough texture of the embroidery. She didn't smile. She didn't show any sign of triumph. She simply looked at it for a moment, then slid it into a pocket on her sleeve. The gesture was one of quiet acceptance. The debt was paid. The matter was closed. She picked up her fork and resumed eating her dinner, the quiet queen in her corner of a now-conquered kingdom. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pale rose and dusty orange, casting long, cool shadows across the gravel of FOB Viper. The air was still and cold, a welcome respite from the oppressive heat that would soon descend. At the far western edge of the perimeter, overlooking a vast, empty expanse of desert, Anya Sharma stood alone. She was not at a computer terminal. There was no pelican case at her feet. In her hands she held a rifle, but it was not a standard M4. It was a custom-built weapon, its chassis a sleek, skeletal frame of carbon fiber and matte black alloy. The scope was oversized, and a strange, fin-like antenna protruded from a module mounted near the stock. It was a Sigint rifle, a specialized piece of equipment designed not to fire bullets, but to capture and analyze battlefield emissions with pinpoint accuracy. It was a tool for a digital sniper. She was cleaning it. With a small toolkit laid out on a clean cloth at her feet, she methodically disassembled the weapon, her movements precise and economical. Each piece was wiped down, inspected, and oiled with a practiced familiarity that spoke of countless hours spent in just this way. It was a ritual, a form of meditation. The physical, tactile process of maintaining her primary tool grounded her in a way that staring at lines of code never could. It was a reminder that for all the sophistication of her work, its consequences were brutally physical. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't startle or look up, her focus remaining on the bolt carrier group in her hands. She already knew who it was. Colonel Evans came to a stop a few feet away. He held 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He stood in silence for a moment, watching her work. Her hands moved with the unthinking competence of a master craftsman. "I never thought I'd see Oracle cleaning a rifle," Evans said, his voice quiet. "Every tool needs maintenance, Colonel," Sharma replied without looking up. "No matter how advanced." He held out one of the mugs. "Coffee?" She paused her work, wiped her hands on a clean rag, and took the mug. She cradled it in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. They stood together, watching the sun climb higher, burning away the last of the morning chill. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding forged in the crucible of the previous day's attack. "The QRF found them," Evans said finally. "Or what was left of them. Your coordinates were perfect." To the meter, he took a sip of his coffee. "The gear they recovered from the mortar pit. My intel guys are baffled. It's nothing we've ever seen before. Custom-built, highly encrypted. They said without you, we'd still be trying to figure out how they jammed us, let alone where they were." "They were good," Sharma acknowledged. "Disciplined, patient. They used our own network's latency against us." It was an elegant attack. There was a note of professional appreciation in her voice, the kind a master chess player might have for a worthy opponent. Evans shook his head in disbelief. "You call it elegant. I call it almost getting my command wiped off the map." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "Your orders just say network overhaul. That's the biggest understatement I've ever read. Who are you really, Chief?" Sharma took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes on the horizon. "I'm a technician, Colonel. The Army invests a lot of time and money to make sure people like me understand how things work. Radios, networks, satellites." She paused, then looked down at the rifle parts laid out on the cloth. "And people. People are just the most complex network of all. They broadcast, they receive, they have vulnerabilities. You just have to know how to listen." She had answered his question without telling him anything at all. He understood. People like her operated in a world of shadows and secrets, their true purpose hidden beneath layers of official classification. He didn't need to know where she came from or which 3-letter agency held her leash. He just needed to know that when his world had dissolved into static and chaos, she had been the one who could hear the signal in the noise. "Well, technician," Evans said with a small, wry smile, "welcome to FOB Viper. I have a feeling our network is about to become very robust." "It will be sufficient," Sharma replied. She finished her coffee, rinsed the mug with water from her canteen, and handed it back to him. He took it, giving her a final nod of respect before leaving her to her ritual. As the sun cleared the horizon, flooding the desert with brilliant, unforgiving light, Anya Sharma finished reassembling her rifle. The final component clicked into place with a satisfying, solid sound. She worked the action, the movement smooth and silent. She shouldered the weapon, peering through the high-powered optic not at the distant ridgeline where the enemy spotter had been, but at the sprawling, complex ecosystem of her own base. Through the scope, she saw it all. She saw the SEALs beginning their morning PT, Riptide among them, moving with a new, more subdued intensity. She saw the drone pilots heading toward their control stations, their steps a little quicker, their faces a little more alert. She saw the perimeter guards, their eyes scanning the desert with a renewed sense of vigilance. The network of FOB Viper was more than just servers and fiber optic cables. It was the people. And yesterday it had been broken. Today it was stronger. She lowered the rifle, her work for the morning done. The sun was warm on her face. The air still tasted of grit and metal, but something had changed. A new kind of order had been established, one built not on rank or reputation, but on the quiet, undeniable evidence of competence under fire. And in the silence of the new day, that was more than sufficient.